Good afternoon, everybody. It is Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, digital sports producer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Back with Paul Zeise for our weekly video with the Post-Gazette columnist. Paul, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm starting to get the fever for the March Madness, Paul. Got to be honest.
I think a lot of people are. Obviously, it's time of year that people love it. But here's the thing, Adam. Most of the interest dies after the first couple of days. Most of the interest people have are in the first 2 days of the tournament. To be honest, that's when people are really excited and they love all these Cinderellas and all of their brackets and all the other stuff. By the end of the second day of the tournament, most of the casual fans have checked out.
Yeah, people are worn out. Their brackets are busted. We're going to get into some basketball talk in a little bit, but we're going to start with the NFL because the NFL is king. And Paul, there was a lot of headlines this week about NFL franchise tags. We're going to get into Lamar Jackson in a little bit as well. But the thing that I noticed from a Steelers perspective is you had three huge name running backs franchise tagged this week. Saquon Barkley from the Giants, Tony Pollard from the Cowboys, and Josh Jacobs from the Raiders. All of them are going to be forced to make like $10 million next year, which I know doesn't sound like a terrible thing. But if you remember the Le'Veon Bell situation a few years back, this feels exactly like what he was trying to kind of fight against. I think his holdout ended up not working for him. He ended up getting less money. Everyone agrees that was a mistake for him individually, but he always said, it's not just about me. I'm trying to reset things for the running back market. Are we seeing the consequences of, the Steelers and the NFL, I guess more broadly, breaking Le'Veon Bell and some of these running backs because their pay just seems to be going nowhere, Paul?
Well, I think we're seeing the consequences of a number of things. First of all, Le'Veon Bell was dumb. Everybody, most of the anti-establishment, I hate the NFL, I hate corporate, America, that group, they were all jumping on board for Le'Veon Bell. And then when his deal came out, they realized he made a mistake. He should have taken the deal that the Steelers got. He would have had a better end to his career. He would have made more money and all that other stuff. And maybe he would have actually reset the market a little bit for running backs had he taken the deal that he got. Now, the thing about it is teams have figured out year 5, year 6, year 7, it starts to get real dicey for most running backs. Unfortunately, at that position, you take a pounding. Your body gets beat up. You take a pounding. It's hard to continue to play at a high level and all that other stuff. And so at the end of the day, when you think about it, teams are smart. They get, the rookie deal is 4 years? If it's a first round pick, then you can get that 50 year, the 50, if he's a first rounder, you can get that. Of course, that teams don't want to use first rounders on him. But my argument would be you can use if you use a first rounder on it, like with Najee Harris, all of a sudden, now the Steelers basically can get a 5th year at cost, at the cost they want or whatever. And so, and then if they want to franchise him for 6 years, at that point, at the end of 6 seasons, you know what? You're probably ready for a younger running back at that point. Ready for a running back, to move on. You just are. And so I think that when we, talk about that situation completely, I don't blame these teams. That's the
I don't blame them either, Paul. I think the thing for me is the NFLPA continues negotiating terrible contracts for running backs because, some of these guys, you can franchise tag them twice, Paul. I think that's what the Steelers attempted to do with Le'Veon Bell. And then, it's 7 years into a running back's career. How many of them really last that long, before that? How many of them will ever get to negotiate a contract with a team, at the top of their value? I think it's very low. And the system, I think, works at other positions. Running back, it just seems like an awful deal for these guys.
It is, but it's the nature of the position because you take such a pounding. You're almost better off being someone like Jaylen Warren, who was undrafted free agent that makes a team, and then for whatever reason you become a starter, early in your career because what's Jaylen Warren? I think his deal was 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. Right? at the end of his 2 years, if he has proven that he can be a running back that is a franchise kind of running back, now he's only got 2 years worth of wear on his body. Now, and he's younger. He's 2 or 3 years younger than guys that are done with their fourth or fifth contract. So fourth or fifth year of their contract. So it's a good deal for him. But if you're somebody that's drafted, it's a tough deal. And especially if, teams, I think, are being short-sighted when they say they don't want to use a first-round pick on a running back. Because, again, that fifth-year option to me is valuable in that position. If you get a guy who's really good, who's able to, his body is able to hold up, I mean, that basically, essentially, like you said, ensures that you can keep him around for 6 or 7 years if you want and not have to commit long-term to him. I think that, to me, is the way to go. Teams are smart now. That's all. And the other thing is they see a lot of guys like Jaylen Warren out there, and they say, well, if that guy was undrafted and he's as good as he is, maybe, we can find that kind of guy late in the draft, or even, undrafted, or sort of off the scrap heap. And if we have the right pieces around him, he's going to be effective. So the running back position 30 years ago is not what the running back position is today.
Yeah, I mean, if you're these guys, Paul, what do you do if you're Tony Pollard, if you're Saquon Barkley? Because Barkley was definitely in that first round category where, this is going to be his fifth year. Or I guess it'll be his sixth year. I mean, is there anything you can do? Do you hold out together to try to make some kind of statement and put it further on the radar in the way that the Le'Veon Bell did? Or is that just – or is it we're just going to see again how self-destructive that is?
Well, I don't know how you're going to do that, because you end up giving up a year in your prime in doing that. I mean, that's the one thing that people don't want to acknowledge. Even some of the still today, the most ardent Le'Veon Bell fans, they can't acknowledge that he gave up one whole year of his prime, where he could have made, what was the franchise number then? Probably about,
it was 12 or, I think it was 12 or 13.
He could have made 12 or 13 million bucks and then moved on. Better yet, he could have went 5 years and made 65 million or whatever it was that the Steelers offered him. But he chose to sit out, and quite frankly, he was never close to the same player when he finally came back.
Oh, promised we were going to get into a little Lamar Jackson stuff. Obviously, that's a big division opponent for the Steelers. The Ravens have placed their non-exclusive franchise tag on him. But, Paul, it appears there aren't any takers as of now in terms of potentially signing him. What do you think of that whole situation? And Lamar Jackson, I believe, is negotiating for himself, right? I don't think he has an agent. What do you think of that mess? What it's become?
I would say this. He's another one like Le'Veon Bell, who created his own mess. They're right now, the Ryan Clarks and the Robert Griffins and those guys of the world, they're all on this thing where they're basically hinting that there's some sort of collusion. They're even hinting that there's racism involved in this. And, they're throwing out Daniel Jones got $160 million or whatever he got, and he's making more than Lamar Jackson. In what world is that correct? They're being dishonest. They're being intellectually dishonest. First of all, let's get a couple things straight. Number one, Lamar Jackson is making less than Daniel Jones because Lamar Jackson turned down $250 million last year from the Ravens. He wanted it fully guaranteed. The Ravens gave him $133 million guaranteed, and that's it. And that's the bottom line. He would have signed that deal. He'd have $135 million in his bank account, right? And he would probably most likely play to the end of that deal and get all $250 million bucks. Even if he only played 3 of the 6 years or 4 of the 6 years, he'd still get over $200 million bucks. So at the bottom line is, if they were going to sign him to that, they weren't going to cut him a year later or 2 years later. He was going to get most of that money, if not all of it. He chose because, again, him and his mother are trying to do this as opposed to hiring an agent. There's people that say, well, he's saving money, this and that. Why should he pay an agent? You pay an agent for this very reason, because an agent probably knows how to negotiate better than you do, because an agent has done this before. So that's number one. He's making less than Geno Smith or Daniel Jones or whoever else has signed their deal this year and Derek Carr because he chose that. No other reason. He chose that. That's number one. Number two, we just talked about running backs. Lamar Jackson going into year 6 now, right? You know what he's done the last 2 years in December and January? Missed a bunch of games because he's hurt at the end of the year. Why? Because he runs the ball a lot. And unlike running backs, he's not that big. He's not that durable. And he's got 750 or 740 carries in his body. And that doesn't include how many times he's been sacked. You only have so many hits in your body. So if you're signing up to get Lamar Jackson, you understand you might be getting a guy who's on the decline a little bit because his best assets are his leg. Secondly, the other thing, teams have to give up 2 first-round picks in order to, because he's on the non-exclusive tag. They've got to give up 2 first-round picks to get him. There's a lot of teams that aren't worth it. They don't think it's worth that. And the final thing is, you have to completely revamp your offense. How many offenses out there right now are built for Lamar Jackson and his talents? One, and the one he's playing in. So you add all of that up together, right? The Ravens did the right thing for the same reasons we just talked about teams franchising running backs. The Ravens just did the right thing. Number one, they said, okay, you think $250 million guaranteed is going to happen for you? Go negotiate it. We're going to put the non-exclusive tag on you. I'm sure all these teams will be knocking down your door. Number one. Number two, we are at least committed to you for 1 more year. But guess what? If in December and January, the most important time of the year, you're on the bench because you're beat up again, because your legs are beat up and because you're injured or whatever, because you got hit too many times, we don't have to commit to you long term. The Ravens are handling this right. And the idea that somehow there's some collusion or some, really, forces of nature that are behind the scenes that we don't know that are keeping Lamar Jackson from getting all these offers. If I was the Falcons, I've got a young quarterback in place. I don't want to overhaul my entire offense. Then I'd have to, draft a completely different than we're going to draft and everything else, right? And do it for a guy who might be hurt and might not be available to me, or after 2 years might not be ready to go.
Yeah, I think, Paul, for me, it's not just the offense; it's the personnel, right? And like the Ravens drafted to Lamar Jackson's talents for years and years and years to get to the point that offense can be as lethal as it is when it's operating at its best, but it's not like super skilled, in the way that you can like come back in games. If you have a better passing game. And so I think that's the biggest concern for me too. If I'm another team is, yeah, I can get Lamar Jackson and that can get people excited, but do I have the stuff immediately around me to succeed with him?
Right. That's the point. And then do you have the offensive line to do it? Do you have the play caller to do it? Do you have the tight ends in place that you're going to need in order to make that work? I mean, and again, you might do all of that stuff and 8 games into the season, he's hurt. So it's a risk. And I don't know any team in their right mind that would give him 6 or 7 years guaranteed. If you find that team, Adam, that's willing to do that, please send them my resume and say I'm a general manager or a scout or something, because maybe I can hoodwink them into hiring me if they're that dumb, right? If they're that dumb and that incompetent, maybe I can get a job there too.
I want to switch gears into another Steelers topic. Ray Fittipaldo, our own Post-Gazette Steelers beat writer. He does, I think, 3 or 4 mock drafts over the course of the offseason. He released his second one on Wednesday. His first 3 picks, Paul, I thought were interesting. He went Broderick Jones, the offensive tackle from Georgia, and then Deonte Banks, the cornerback from Maryland, someone that Mike Tomlin almost certainly knows well, and then Siaki Ika, the nose tackle from Baylor. If those were the first 3 picks, Paul, what do you think of that in terms of addressing the Steelers' needs?
Well, I mean, to me, I would be very, very, very upset about it because they didn't get Joe Porter Jr., Jordan Addison, and Kalijah Cansey, because those are the only 3 guys on the board that anybody in this town seemingly will accept. It's incredible. The discussions about the draft, they're incredible to me. Because so many people seem so hell-bent on we've got to have these guys we're familiar with. I would be okay with what Ray's talking about. I mean, I think that, again, what are the positions they need? corner, right? Inside linebacker, defensive line, offensive line. And I would say offensive line is probably fourth on that list for a number of reasons. First off and first up being you're not going to play an offensive lineman this year unless maybe a guard. Maybe you have a guard come in and play over one of the two that you have, but maybe it enables you to cut one of those guys. But for the most part, you're not going to play the offensive line just sort of figured it out at the end of the year last year. So you want to continue to build on that, I would think. So to me, corner, inside linebacker, and defensive line, and also receiver on some level receiver. So those are the four positions that they need. The names in the mock drafts are all going to change over the course of the next month or two, but the ideas are probably all going to be the same.
Yeah, I think of those three, the one I have the biggest issue with is Ika. I keep saying it. I think I think that's kind of a luxury item for the Steelers at this point is a run stuffing nose tackle. Of course, you'd love to see a Casey Hampton type on that defensive line. But I'd rather see someone who can get to the quarterback a little bit more because that's the coin of the realm in the NFL these days. Paul, another one of the big Steelers related storylines of the week was the NFLPA survey of players on working conditions, facilities around the NFL. The Steelers ranked 22nd in that survey of player comfort and those types of things. Paul, as we're about to get into free agency, it's easy for you and I to say that stuff doesn't matter because, we don't have to work there and we're not used to certain things, especially at some of these palatial college campuses, right? If you're coming from there, a lot of times the NFL facilities are almost a downgrade. What are your thoughts on where the Steelers are and what investment you'd expect them to make to attract primo free agents if they want to sign them?
Well, if I were the Steelers, here's what I would do. One of two things. I would either try and buy out Pitt, and say, we need this whole facility, which is what I've heard a number of ex-Steelers and guys that are on the radio and the hot take shows talk about. The Steelers facility is just way too small. There's nowhere to expand. There's nowhere to go. There's no, this and that and everything. I would either buy out Pitt or I would find a new area and build a new facility, one or the other, because they really can't do a whole lot. I mean, you can put new carpeting in and, put some new shiny, bells and whistles and all that other stuff, but there's nowhere to go. The organization is expanded. The office space is cramped, right? The locker room is what it is. Now, if you bought out Pitt, now all of a sudden you knock out some of those walls and you do a couple of, some renovations and, all of a sudden you could have an incredibly large weight room, an incredible locker room, depending on how you do it and everything else. And then you can really make some real significant upgrades. But, when the building was built in about 1999, 2000, or whenever it was built, I mean, I'm sure it was like state of the art. But these things keep evolving and they keep evolving. And what happens is a lot of times you get stuck in a space that's not big enough. So when you start to expand, you can't really expand the way you want to. So yeah, they can, upgrade some of the things, I guess, buy new weights, get some new coal, equipment, put some more paint on the walls. But unless they're going to make that their facility and only their facility, I just think they can't do a whole lot. They can't change that completely a whole lot. I've been to some of the other facilities of some of these teams that are out, in the middle of nowhere, that they have unlimited space and they have all kinds of different things that they're able to do because they have unlimited space. To be honest, the Pitt shares the facilities with the Steelers thing is, it is what it is. It's pretty cool for Pittsburgh, but I think it's bad for both. At this point, I think it's bad for both sides of that equation. I think Pitt, Pitt is to the point where they probably could use a bigger facility and, have access to the field anytime they want it, especially the indoor field, as opposed to having to, schedule around the Steelers and everything else. And I think the Steelers desperately need more space. And the only way you're going to get more space is either move somewhere else and build your own place, or buy out Pitt, or do whatever you have to do to get sort of separation agreement and go from there.
Yeah, I think it's a good point about Pitt too, Paul, because it's especially in college football, that's where the money is for these facilities that just seem to go on and keep expanding, and Pitt's going to have to keep up at some point. So I agree with you wholeheartedly on that point. Paul, I want to transition to the little Penguins talk. We're talking on Wednesday after their comeback from a 4-0 deficit against the Columbus Blue Jackets to win 5-4 in overtime. Paul, was that game an example of what's right with the Penguins and why they might still be able to surprise people yet? Or was it, an example of them getting really lucky after, continuing to show the same issues even after the trade deadline that were there before and that had people very frustrated?
When they were down 3-0, I bet the Penguins, and I got like plus 275, and I had no doubt I was going to win the game. Not because necessarily I think the Penguins are going to do anything special, but Columbus is that bad. Columbus is absolutely that bad. So I knew eventually the Penguins would figure it out and they would score enough goals to win the game. I had no reservations at all. I think you take that game and throw it out the window. I know there are some people that want to, make it into some, special, unbelievable. Look at this team, the heart and the grit. They're able to come back. There's others that say, well, look, the first two periods, they, showed, who they really are and all this other stuff. I think they played a really bad team. They came out sloppy. And then when it was time, okay, now we need to go win, they went and won the game. So clearly to me, the only storyline, Adam, that I take out of that game is that what's going on with Tristan Jarry. That's the only storyline. They had to pull him out of the game against the Columbus Blue Jackets, who are terrible. That is the only thing I would tell you that comes out of this game. As far as the Penguins, I expected them to score goals against Columbus. I expected them to be able to, outskate them. I expected them to be able to jump on them like they did. And so that didn't shock me at all. I don't read into it like they've got some, this is 2016 or 17 again, and they've got this old feeling where they're never out of the game and all the other stuff. They played a really bad hockey team. That's just what it is. And I think at that point, you play a bad hockey team, guess what happens? When you play a bad hockey team like Columbus, and you play well or you play reasonably well, you generally win. So to me, the story out of that game was Jarry. And if he plays like that, I don't care who they play, they have no chance of going anywhere in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Paul. And I guess there's not a whole lot more to say other than they didn't address the goalie position in any meaningful way at the trade deadline. They not only did they not bring in a suitable backup, I think they didn't even bring in anyone who could maybe push Tristan Jarry, and I think that's something that maybe he needs at this stage. But they got a decision to make on him, and these next month and a half of games are going to be critical before we get into the playoffs. Paul also wanted to talk a little college hoops. Unfortunately, Pitt fans, I'm sure you'd love us to talk about the Panthers, but we are recording this literally during the Pitt versus Georgia Tech game at the ACC tournament. And there's a lot of talk about Pitt that hinges on the result of that. Because I think if they win that game, they're in. If they lose, they might be out. And so it's hard for us to say right now anything really about that team.
Put it this way. If you tune in on Thursday afternoon and Pitt is playing a game, it means they're in the NCAA tournament. If you tune in Thursday afternoon and Georgia Tech is playing Duke, it probably means that Pitt coaches and players are going to have 3 or 4 sleepless nights until Sunday sweating to figure out if they can get in.
So, Paul, with that in mind, I'm going to switch gears to one of our other local teams that's in the mix for March Madness, which is Penn State, charged toward the end of the season, beat Maryland by 1 point on Sunday. They will play tonight for all of you who are watching Thursday night against Illinois. Paul, is that a must-win for them to get into the tournament, or do you think they can afford to lose that game and still make it in, given the resume they've put together?
I think they got to win at least once. They got to win at least once. And they got to beat Illinois, and if they don't, I don't think they're in. I think they're in the same situation as Pitt. I think that they've got a lot of losses, and that's a problem. I don't know that they necessarily have any horrific losses, but the reality of the situation is they are a team that, if you ask me, is hanging right there on the bubble. In order to be safe and sure and secure, they better beat Illinois. That's all I'm going to tell you. If they lose to Illinois, it could be, again, they'll have sleepless nights until Sunday, and I could absolutely see them Sunday night getting the phone call from the NIT. Hey, do you want to come play in our tournament?
Yeah, and the Penn State knows the NIT well, Paul. You can't spell Nittany without NIT, right? So let's play a little game. If they both get in, Pitt and Penn State, which team do you think has a better chance to go further?
You know what? Here's the thing. I think this sounds like a cop-out, but hear me out. I kind of think they both have the same chance, and I'll tell you why. Because both of them are really reliant on hitting threes, and they're both capable of turning your lights out from the three-point line as well. So if they got hot, either one of these teams got hot, they can make a run, absolutely. If they don't get hot, it could be, a situation where they go home in the first round. So, I know it's a cop-out in some ways, but I think they're very similar teams in that, if you look at the box score after a game and they've got 12, 13, 14 threes, they probably are winning the game because that just sort of ignites them and their entire game goes to a different level. And because they've got multiple guys that can be shot makers, they become really hard to defend if, two or three of their guys are actually hitting their threes. So, I would say if you look at both teams, I wouldn't want to play either. Here's the thing. I could make the case that both probably should be in the NIT. I could also make the case that both could get to the Elite Eight. I mean, I wouldn't want to be, they'd have to get hot, obviously, and have the right path. But I know if I was a higher seed, I would not want to see either one of those two teams.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question because I think Pitt's got the deeper team. I think Penn State's got the best player. I mean, I think some places he's already been selected an All-American, Jalen Pickett. That's kind of why I've said on Twitter the other day, Paul, I'd love to see them play in the first four. I mean, think about how little juice those first four games have had for so long. Can you imagine these two teams, which I think are both older than like multiple NBA teams at this point? It would be a glorious war to watch those two go duke it out for an 11 seed, I think.
That would be tremendous. I think that would be tremendous. I'd be all for that. Or Pitt playing West Virginia. I'd be all for that too. One or the other in the first four. But I think if Pitt wins today, they'll probably be a 10 seed. So, to me, they probably will avoid the first four, but I think that would be tremendous.
Yeah, I think that's the likely scenario too. I think either one of them wins and they play their way out, or both of them lose and one of them at least doesn't make the tournament. And I think it's kind of hard to make that scenario work, but I'd still love to see it.
Imagine the meltdown if Pitt were to lose and Penn State were to win a game or two, and Penn State was in the NCAA tournament and Pitt was in the NIT. Imagine the meltdown around here. That would be quite interesting.
Yeah, it would be something. I mean, people forget. I think Penn State's been the better program for 5 or 6 years now, Paul. So even though Pitt is the historical better program and Penn State's kind of always been a joke, those late Chambers teams and going into the Micah Shrewsbury era, they've really turned things around. But that's enough from the Penn State grad here. Paul, are there any general NCAA tournament March Madness storylines you're watching in the run-up to Selection Sunday?
Well, I would say the Big 12, I've heard as many as, what do they have, 11 teams? How many teams do they have in their conference right now? 11, 10, 11? I've heard people say that every team is going to get in, which is asinine, if you ask me. But I've heard people say that they're by far, I can't imagine Texas Tech is getting in, but I've heard people say, that they are by far the best conference. The Big 10 is going to get a lot of teams in, but can they advance once they're in? That's been the question, right? And how many are the ACC going to get in? That's the other question. Is it going to be 5? I mean, I don't think it'll be 4, but I could make a case that it might be 4. Is it going to be 6? Could it be a situation of where it's 7 because North Carolina or some other team that's not projected to be in somehow makes a run and wins the thing? And then you look at the other 6 teams who have somewhat of an NCAA tournament resume. I mean, that's a storyline for me. And then, of course, I think the other one is the whole thing with Alabama and, Brandon Miller and how they handle all of those things and handle the expectations of maybe being the number one overall seed.
And I think it's all going to be interesting, Paul. I kind of love championship week. I think it should be included in the whole March Madness conversation because so much, this is basically like the playing round. That's why I hate the idea of NCAA tournament expansion. It's not because I don't think I'd enjoy the NCAA tournament at 96 teams. I think I'll always enjoy the NCAA tournament. I think you would ruin championship week and you would ruin these games that really matter to try to get into the big dance if you expanded to 96 teams or something like that.
I have a radical idea that would never, ever, 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 ever be adopted, but here it is. So you take the 32 regular season champs. They're in. So now you have 36 spots, right? I would take the other 318 teams and divide them essentially into 9-team groups based on net rankings and all this other stuff, right? So that basically the next 36 ranked teams after those 32, the next 36 ranked teams are 1 seeds and go from there. And I would have 36 9-team groups that are all playing with the winner going to the NCAA tournament. That would be more interesting to me than this championship week.
I don't know. I like watching those teams at the bottom try to claw their way, and maybe that's the Penn State grad in me because that's all Penn State ever has to do, right? Is this is as good as it gets for Penn State. But Paul, thanks for stopping by. This time next week we'll have a bracket. We'll have the games will probably be started by the time I sit down to publish this video with you. So thanks for stopping by, and we hope you all enjoyed the video.
All right, thanks, man.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.